I started doing leadership training for law enforcement in 1984. So you think about that's 42 years. I've always asked this question as I begin the class. And I want you to think about how you would answer the question as well. What percentage of managers and supervisors are leaders? They practice communication, leading by example, caring for their people, being good communicators, etc. I've asked that question for 42 years. And so think of the literally probably now thousands of people who were sitting in class when I asked that question. And to show the extent of the problem of management failure to lead, most of the answers have been only about 10 to 20%. Most staff and operational people fail to practice leadership after they get promoted. Now, they practice two leadership skills before promoted. They communicate with the public and they deal with problems. But once they become promoted, they change and it's not for the good. And it's interesting that operational staff who communicate and deal with problems now become a management culture where the number one complaint is they don't deal with problems and don't deal with the problem employee. And number two, they don't communicate with people. I'd been doing this type of training for about 10 years. And I was doing a class at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Brunswick that was a class for first line supervisors. It had multiple organizations and agencies in there from the various components of law enforcement. And as we got ready to start the class, I was sitting in the front and I noticed that each person had a what they call, I guess, a name tent. It was a folded piece of paper that had their name and their agency. And I noticed that one of the guys on the front row, I noticed his organization and I had not seen that organization represented in this class for federal supervisors before, and I was very interested in how he was going to answer that question. And to make sure that he answered first, I usually just call out what percentage of managers and supervisors are leaders, and everybody can chime in. This time I said, I want you to think about what percentage of supervisors and managers in your experience were leaders. And so I would like for you to raise your hand if you would like to respond to that. What percentage of your supervisors and managers and those above you during your career led, communicated, dealt with problems, cared for you and your family, so forth and so on? Well, a lot of people raised their hand, but I called on the guy on the front row. And I said, okay, I said, you, and I pointed my finger. And I said, what percentage of your supervisors and managers led and practiced consistently leadership skills? And this was his answer. About 80 to 90%. Some people just don't get it and don't lead, but most people do. The nonverbal reaction of the rest of the people in the class was hysterical. They were like, what? And you could see this surprise on their faces. One guy actually called out from the back of the room, said, my calculation of in my career of my managers and supervisors was only about 10% are leaders. And then he asked this question, who in the hell do you work for? And the young man in the front said, I'm a lieutenant with the United States Marine Corps. And I started laughing because I knew that his answer was going to be different from the other ones. How does the military create leaders better than law enforcement and other professions? Let's talk about it. First off, entry level. I think we do a good job in our academies and stuff for law enforcement, but the military, their entry into the profession, boot camp, basic training, they assassinate individual pride and a focus on me, a love of self. They assassinate it in San Diego and other places around the country. They put you through the grind. They strip this, it's all about me, away from every man and woman that goes through that training. And it is awesome to watch that. And I think each of the services does that well. And I want to say this, in my 75 years on this earth, the most transformational organizations are the military. And because of this, they say it's not about you, it's about the mission, it's about the Marine Corps, it's about the Air Force, the Army, et cetera, et cetera. It's about your brothers and sisters that you're going to go to war with. And to show you that some people do it better than other, I came in at the end of Vietnam, and it was Vietnam was still going on. I got drafted and had to sign delayed entry in order to finish my college degree. And I did not want to be there. I wanted to be a police officer, but I showed up at basic training. And after basic training, I had to go to MP school, military police school. And most of us in that training unit, platoon or whatever, we were not happy about being there and leaving our civilian lives. And all of a sudden, about 12 guys walked in formation, and they weren't Army people, they were Marines. And they were with a gunny sergeant, and he walked them into our barracks and said, listen, he said, I know this is an Army course, but we're trying to develop a course of this specialty, and these Marines are going to go through this class with you. And I noticed right off the bat, they were different than us. I mean, we were squared away in many ways because of our experience in basic training, but these guys were at a different level. And two things I remember that I will always remember. One, there was a young Marine, and that first night, everybody's getting in their bunks and everybody's starting to snore and everything. And as I'm laying in my bunk, I hear this guy that had grown up in the inner city. I heard this voice singing it was very low voice. I mean, it wasn't meant to keep anybody awake or anything. And then I realized what he was singing was the Marine Corps hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. And you may think that's cheesy, but later on, as I got to know this guy a little bit, as we went through this course, he was celebrating a new family, a new identity from the one that he grew up with in the worst parts of a major urban city. He had new family, new friends, a new purpose. That was one example. But what really hit me about how they were even more unified than we were in the Army was whoever scored of the Marines the highest academic grade going through this course would get to go to anywhere they wanted to in the world. So obviously that was a plum reward. And I know that everybody was going to Okinawa, but the person who won the award. And apparently Okinawa was not a real popular place in 1973. So at the end of the course, and I knew who was going to win it because there was a guy who I sat in class with him. He was sharp as a tack. He was very clearly able to grasp the concepts and stuff. And so after the course was over and then we were getting ready to graduate, I figured he had won the academic awards. I asked one of the Marines, I said, so did whatever his name was, let's say it's Roy. I said, so did Roy win the award? He said, oh, yeah, hands down, he won the award. He won the award. I said, well, where's he going for his assignment? He goes, Okinawa. I said, what? I thought Okinawa was not the best place. And he goes, it's not. But he gave his selection opportunity to the one Marine in this group who was married so that he could take his spouse with him to the assignment because Okinawa is not what we call an accompanied tour. You have to go by yourself. You can't bring your spouse with you. That was the height of unselfishness, that you would give up your chance to go to any base that you wanted to so that a fellow Marine could take his wife. And that shows that focus on the mission and the men and women around you, not you. And I saw that throughout my involvement in the Army. And then eventually I was in the Navy with their law enforcement, that there was more of a focus on we and the mission and something bigger than ourselves, and how they maintain that. And why you're going to see that word maintains very important is that they practice respectful insubordination. That it doesn't matter what rank, it doesn't matter how high you go up. The military believes that you have the necessity to have men and women be honest with you, regardless of your rank. And they call it respectful insubordination because if you're a colonel, every man and woman that works under you in the enlisted ranks or as junior officers is encouraged to tell you the truth if you're making a bad decision, if you're getting too full of yourself, etc. And the people behind that is the senior enlisted people. And I saw that in the military. One thing that I saw was that I had a commanding officer. He was okay. You could tell he was a little full of himself, but he was temporarily our commanding officer for a couple of years, and I didn't think anything about it. And I recommended a guy under my command for a medal for project he had done, a ribbon, so to speak. And so I submitted it up the chain of command, and the CO, commanding officer, had to sign off on it. And when the lieutenant commander, I kept asking him, I said, "Have you gotten your ribbon yet?" And he said, "No." So I called headquarters and I said, "Listen, I put in so and so for an award and I've not heard back." And so the guy at the headquarters said, "Well, that's interesting." He said, "The only recommendation we had for a ribbon and a medal was the commanding officer." I go, "What?" I said, "What did he get this ribbon for?" He said, "Well, you ought to know. You recommended him." I said, "I recommended him?" He goes, "Yeah, I've got the recommendation right here. You signed it." And he could tell by my pause that something was going on. And I'm going, "Oh, crap." I knew that the commanding officer had taken the application for medal that I had sent up for somebody else and had changed that person's name for his name. Y'all listen, throughout my law enforcement career, I saw people in higher ranks take credit for what people on the ground did and the detectives did. That was kind of almost normal. And so I was a little concerned when the guy from headquarters told me that, and he sensed my hesitation. He says, "Is there a problem here, Commander Enter?" I said, "Could be." He said, "Let me do something. I'm going to send this to you and you look at it, and then I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. So you tell me what you saw." So he called me back and said, "What'd you see?" I said, he switched his name for the guy that I put in for the ribbon. And he goes, "Okay." And I honestly, I'm saying this sincerely, I never thought anything was going to be done about that because, again, I never saw people in law enforcement get nailed for taking credit for other people's work. And a month later, I heard that my commanding officer had been ripped to shreds by the people at the top and told that he needed to plan on retiring because he was never going to be promoted again because they took leadership seriously, because that's the way the military does it. When you think about what the military ask people to do, they ask them to risk their lives for this country. And they want to make sure that the people that are commanding people take care of their people. And as a result of that, they create leaders and maintain leaders for the future. They're much better at this than we are. And we need to think about that and learn from that. This is not about you. Leadership is not about your little kingdom. Leadership is about the mission and the brothers and sisters who do it. And the military does it better than anybody I've ever seen.